Hello and welcome to AFP. My name is Devang, and I'm joined by the usual suspect, just one this time, David Goss. On today's show, we chat MLS semifinals, plus an MLS final preview, Lionel Messi potentially to MLS awards. We do have Sean Kay to talk about the CPL final and Forge lifting the trophy once again, along with the Portland Thorns triumphing in the NWSL. So that's great. And of course, it's the mailbag. Ask AFP. David, how are we doing, my friend? Another hectic, jam-packed week of sports. Which league is covering itself with less glory?
Well, I was in Philly on Sunday trying to watch the LAFC playoff game during the Eagles-Steelers game, an undefeated Eagles against their state rival. As the Philly, everyone's wearing Red October Philly stuff, and the Sixers were winning or something at the same time. And I was like, man, there's a lot of sports going on. So, it feels hectic right now. I will say, having Sean out for the show kind of feels like when you hear your parents are going to be away and you're like, oh, it's going to be the best. But then you know you're going to eat too much candy and get sick. That's kind of what it feels like having Sean out.
Speaking of which, did you do anything for Halloween?
I did not. I played soccer. My team won 13-0, which was an extremely uncomfortable experience.
Wow.
Yeah, it was brutal.
A bit classless. Can I say classless, Dave, to run up the score like this in a recreational game?
So we have a group, WhatsApp group chat for the league that all the captains are in. My wife's one of the captains, so I see what gets posted in it. And a few weeks ago, one of the teams put in 11-0, and I said, "That's embarrassing. Why would you keep scoring?" And I didn't know which team that was against.
And yet,
so this team showed up with down a player and played. Like, I can't even explain to you what they were doing. It was so shocking. I kept turning to people on my team and it's like, I don't know what to do. Like, their one forward would press. And it's like, why are you chasing the ball by yourself? The other guys just kept playing long balls. They changed goalies like 6 times throughout the game. And it's like, it's almost more embarrassing to pass out of goal scoring chances at a time. And we went, let me make this clear, Devang, we purposely went down a player at halftime. So we played even numbers the second half and we still scored like 6 goals.
A bunch of Gandhis over here. How benevolent of you to take a player off.
What about you, Devang?
I didn't dress up at all for Halloween. I've actually been a bit under the weather and done 80 COVID rapid tests, and they're all coming back negative, leading me to believe that there's a new super bug out there, but it feels like everyone's kind of going through this flu season malaise. But I've just noticed, I guess, and this is anecdotal and perhaps I'm not factoring in COVID well enough, but no one trick-or-treats anymore, really at all. Even in the suburbs, I feel like trick-or-treating is done, which is quite sad to me because I really did love it so much as a kid.
That is not true in my neighborhood. My neighborhood is chaos.
Exactly. And this is, again, anecdotal evidence is usually terrible. So I'm glad I'm being pushed back here.
It's they closed down a ton of the streets. I saw a person I know post a picture of Maggie Gyllenhaal and Peter Dinklage sitting on a stoop in my neighborhood giving out candy. So Halloween is alive in Brooklyn Heights. If you want to experience it next year, you could come.
I just might, because overall, Halloween is a great holiday. Big fan. I was going to say I've been on that losing end in a rec game where you're just getting absolutely pummeled by a team of all-stars who, I don't know, played for like Celtic for 4 years and then all met up in Canada and decided to play in a rec. I feel like this happened to me several times. So it sucks. It's not fun, but also it's part of the game, I guess, right?
It is the beautiful game.
It is. Before we get to this smorgasbord of action, and the leagues being in turmoil that I was referring to off the top, the NBA news that has come out today has been just absolutely shocking stuff. But I guess this is just kind of par for the course when it comes to professional leagues and the way they handle things. But yeah, sports, man, just incredible. Before we get to all of the soccer, a reminder, we are on patreon.com/a football podcast. Join us there. Get the show ad free. But what else do they get, DG?
You get to be on part of our Discord. I was at all these games this weekend, and it was awesome to have everyone in the Discord sort of chatting about what's going on because you miss stuff. when you're there, but you have other experiences. So we could kind of all do that together. Chatting, some people have been putting in more, some really cool gear that's been coming out heading towards the World Cup that I would not have found otherwise. So you get to be a part of the Discord. You get the show early and ad-free.
It's a great deal. Truly a wonderful community of people that I'm proud of many things about this show, but I think the community we've fostered is one of the top highlights, and I truly recommend it if you're a footy fan or just a fan of good sports banter, which I think is sometimes tough to come by. So head on over to patreon.com/a football podcast. When we come back, the final is set in MLS, a clash of the best teams. We tee it up next.
Oh, here comes an energized Union now after that goal.
Oh, this place just exploded. Bazo hands it off for Berg. McGlynn. Carranza back into the middle. It's a goal! It's Gazdag! It's Philadelphia in the lead!
David, you were there in person to witness the Philadelphia Union reaching the MLS Cup final for the first time in their history. The top team in the East, the team that we sometimes just overlooked, I felt like, because they were so damn good. Took care of business, which I think is, to me, always really impressive when you talk about the top teams and handling adversity, but also handling expectations, because I think we've seen this Union team themselves, David, fail to do that in the past. But imagine being a Philly sports fan right now. The Eagles are undefeated. The Phillies are in the World Series, and the Union are about to play at a Cup final. That's pretty dang good.
Yeah, it was. It's definitely a vibe right now in Philadelphia. I thought Stu Holden did a very good job post game when he was part
great.
of giving away the Eastern Conference trophy and getting the crowd going. And it sort of felt like that, as I said in the opening segment, about being in Philly this weekend and sort of just everything that's going on there and how locked in everyone is. And, you know, it's like the perfect time to be in Philly too. It's fall, the leaves. They've got all the good food. Like, it was an awesome day. And then being at the stadium was special. I've kind of dug into this a bunch this week on my show MLS Today. I had Kevin Kinkead on, who's covered Union since before they were an MLS team and is there quite a lot. And over the last 5 years, the story has changed, but the Union were a joke in Major League Soccer. And it wasn't like, oh, this team's not that put together that well. It was like, I don't know what the future is for this club. Like Maurice Adu and Alejandro Bedoya were their big DP signings, and Adu was playing out of position at center back when rarely healthy. And Bedoya has obviously been a great player, but the two playoffs they made, 2017 and 2018, I believe, 16 and 18, they lost 3-1 at Toronto. Even though they tied it, they were never in that game. They lost 3-1 at NYCFC, and it felt like that was the answer to, like, what's the Union? It is just like, this is a club who, at best, they're going to spend on Alejandro Bedoya. They're going to build their team the same way everyone else does, with worse talent, and they're going to go and lose in the first round of the playoffs to the really good teams, 3-1. And then Ernie Stewart sort of puts some new stuff in place, and Ernst Tanner has now taken it to another level. And as you said, they're the best team that played the best game. And I thought it was impressive that they went down 1-0, and they were able to still stick with their game plan and belief in a moment like that and get the win. And credit to them that it's not just the starters, right? It was Corey Burke and Jack McGlynn, I think, that really led them to the win in this one.
Corey Burke, who's done that, I feel, a bunch of times this season. David coming off the bench and being an immediate spark plug, and in this case, scoring the dagger. But to come back was impressive. I also, like I mentioned, I think maybe the reason the Union don't get as much shine outside of their market or outside of the MLS rabid fans is because perhaps there is a lack of star power outside of your Andre Blakes, but I look at someone like Gazdag in the season he's had, and also Carranza. It makes sense if it's so simple to say this, David, but it makes sense that they're here because their best players showing up in a big game like this. I felt like it was warranted and it was justified to see them kind of capitalize because throughout this season, they've been able to do this thing.
They deserve to win. They deserved because of the team they've built. They deserve because of the season they have. And then they deserve because of the performance they've put in across the two playoff games. I absolutely agree with that. And I think there's the part where it's like, yeah, Gazdag, he's Hungarian. That's not a flashy country that we're following. And I think a lot of their style is part of it as well, right? They don't play free-flowing soccer. They're not super creative, although they do score a ton of goals. It's very direct in a different way. And, their leading assist man is a left back out of the German third division who sort of looks like he could play on one of those rec teams that crushes you or me week in and week out. Like, he doesn't look like an elite athlete for the most part. Jack Elliott, I've never seen a borderline best 11 defender trip as many times as he does, right? But he is fantastic. Like, that's sort of this team outside of Andre Blake. And so it makes sense, but winning will change that, right? If they win MLS Cup this year, like, that shine will last for a few years, I think. And there's the potential they continue to win after this.
Agreed. The year of Philadelphia, which I'm a big fan of. It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. And I feel like through that and visiting the city multiple times, I have a soft spot in my heart for it, David. Outside of your New Yorks, your LAs, or your Miamis, really do like Philadelphia. So shouts to that city, who will now play LAFC, the top team in the West, taking care of business. The two top teams in the league facing off in the final. I was watching a clip, DG, today of, I think it was Herc Gomez talking about the pointlessness of conferences and why we should get rid of them for MLS playoffs so that we ensure we get these dream finals, whether it be a Galaxy versus the LAFCs or a Toronto versus Montreal. But it's hard to make that comment, I feel like, in this instance, because this truly is a matchup of the best teams.
Yeah, I didn't see that. I think that's an interesting idea, but as you said, we sort of found.
Yeah, and generally, I think I back it because I do like the idea of having such massive rivalry games involve the highest stakes. But in this sense, you can say they lucked out with the format that they got the two best teams at the end.
But also, I mean, you want, and I could be wrong, right? Austin, LAFC was a great environment, and those are pretty far cities away. But like, you want the away fans at the game. You want rivalry. That's probably less likely. Yeah, maybe you'll get it in MLS Cup, but you're not going to get it beforehand if the Galaxy are playing Atlanta in the first round of the playoffs, right? Like, regionalizing it, I think, gives more opportunity for fans to travel and for there to be more history and background into more of the games. And I'm sorry, you meet in the playoffs. Like, okay, you want it for MLS Cup, understood, but, NYCFC Philly in the Eastern Conference Finals back-to-back years, that's as big as it gets for them. And now Philly and LAFC are going to have a rivalry, right? You hate Seattle. You didn't before, but now you do.
Exactly. No, it's a fair point. And I think once again, it's a conversation we allude to a bit later in the show regarding maybe mimicking other formats and whether or not that's truly a good idea for this league. Just because it works somewhere else, should it work here? I think these are all conversations that are worth having. But once again, I find it hard to make that argument when we do have Philadelphia versus LAFC and the idea that we did just have Austin and Dallas play, right? And we just did have the Galaxy and LAFC play. And it's not like we were robbed of those matchups, So I think there's something to be said for this conference finals format, or just the conference format in general. But to get into the game, David, once again, I think the vibes or the similarities to the Union and their best players stepping up, I think once again that was the case in this game. Whether it's your Christian Arangos or your Carlos Velas, they showed up, and against an Austin team that I don't want to say they ran out of luck, because they were damn good this year, and we can credit their success to their abilities on the field. That being said, it did feel like Cinderella's time running out in this moment.
It was the next level. LAFC at home in the Western Conference Finals was a level that Austin couldn't get to, and we might see in a week that it's a level no one else in MLS can get to, right? They are the Sports Shield winner. They are hosting MLS Cup. If they win the whole thing, then the reality is it wasn't meant to be for Austin, because it wasn't meant to be for anyone. Now, I think it's really interesting what we're seeing from LAFC. That's the best game they've played since Chiellini and Bale signed for the team. And I think there's a few reasons for that. They have finally returned back to the team they were before, outside of Buongo, who's obviously made a difference and has earned his way back into the team. And I would say outside of Chiellini for a half of this game, which was why you brought him in. You brought him in to sort of be a specialist in big moments when you need him. And I think part of the reason they brought him in was because Segura was still out with the ACL surgery. You didn't know how he'd respond. He misses this game. But I think we're seeing LAFC back to who they were and what made them their best. And I think when you look at this game, you do see, okay, LAFC lost their mojo because they changed so many pieces and moved things around, but they're fresh. And Austin looked like a team that almost everyone had started 30 games this year and played 3 playoff games.
Visibly gassed was the best description I could use.
And I'm curious to see what Philly now looks like. And I'm wondering if there's a gap between Austin and Philly, or if the gap is LAFC's depth versus everyone else, because Philly, again, Bedoya started over 30 games this year. Like Corey Burke, great sub. Jack McGlynn, great sub. If one of the center backs goes down,
right,
Brandon Craig is the next starter. He's 17 years old. So, and I'm not saying someone's going to go down. What I'm saying is I'm curious to see if NYC and Cincinnati were also exhausted and Philly matched them and was better. And if LAFC's another gear, or if Philly is so much more elevated than Austin. Like, I'm curious to see what that is. But you saw why LAFC made a lot of these moves. I talked to John Thornton earlier today, and he sort of alluded to that of like, I thought we needed this. This is why I said yes on all these moves. And now we're here. And this is, I didn't think we could get here without making these moves.
I always find it fascinating to go on Google and select a matchup and see the win probability that they've measured through some analytics or data or mysterious stats that we don't have access to. But I am fascinated by the fact that LAFC is the 54% favorite, 22% for Philadelphia. They have a draw probability listed here as well, which is not possible in a final, but I guess they could mean that it's going to PKs. But is this because this is a home game for LAFC, David? Do you think that's why this is so heavily skewed, or maybe that LAFC is the favorite in this matchup between two teams that, like we've been saying, have been tough to separate this season in terms of how special they've looked? And I think arguably LAFC has had more recent dips in form, correct? So yeah. I wonder, is this just hosting the final? That's why they're favored this way.
Well, so on the thing with the dips in form, though, I think Bedoya's injury at the end of the year and the results they had with him out and then seeing him limp off at halftime of the last game, I think that also goes into it, where I don't think Philly's peaking right now. Like, they already peaked this year. This is not the best soccer they can play. It doesn't look like Michael Ura is healthy either. And I think that's part of why Burke was such a difference maker. Carranza scores his first goal since August. There's other elements in this rather than just LAFC being home, but I think being home on a trip from Philly to LA is a massive advantage. And I think LAFC playing their best game in the last game with Bouanga coming on and, Vela showing that he's healthy in that game. I think all of that sort of goes into the fact that I don't want to say they're heavy favorites, but I can understand people setting numbers and lines at where they've been. I'm
going to pick LAFC. I know I just laid waste to the Google predictability model, or their prediction model, but I'm going to rely on the fact that they're at home. I've seen what it's like as well, though, when teams are at home in MLS Cup finals, and that not necessarily being a good thing. But I think, to kind of build off your points, David, the contributions that they've been getting from not just the stars, but also the guys they brought in to make a difference in these situations, including your Chiellinis. Like, it feels like it's all coming together at the right time for a club that, like we've been saying as well, I think maybe in the separation between them and Philadelphia, the aesthetic viewing of their soccer is a joy to watch. And I think that was the experience I had watching them kind of take care of business against Austin. So I'm going to pick them. David, I'm not sure where you're leaning.
I'm finding it hard to lean away from that as well. Just the performance against Austin was so convincing. And I do genuinely believe with both these teams, if they play their game at the best, they'll win, which Philly probably has that other teams didn't in this playoffs. Maybe if Austin played their best against LAFC's best, they wouldn't have won because they just couldn't. I don't think that's the case with Philly. Like, I think Philly has the talent, the pieces that fit together well enough that if they played their best game, they could win. And I do think it fits Philly to be away in this game because they don't want the ball. They don't really want the favorite tag. Like they want that all against them. That's how they play their best soccer. And so that's where I kind of am unsure. And Philly has struggled at most against back threes or back fives, 3 center backs. LAFC can do that with Hibiaga and Chiellini. I don't think they will. And so again, I think a lot of this goes well for Philly, but I still am not sure if Ua and Bedoya start. And if they do, can Philly hang on long enough to get McGlynn and Burke back in? And can Burke play at that level once again against this LAFC team? So I think there's a lot of question marks in this one on both sides. I picked Philly before the bracket, before the playoffs started to win the whole thing. So I'll pick them again.
I love it. Can't pick the same team. It's the first rule of podcasting. News and notes, MLS-wise, the big non-on-the-pitch news. Once again, the Lionel Messi to Miami rumors have picked up steam, but this time the report coming from the Athletic's David Ornstein, the Ornacle. If you're an Arsenal fan, I think we know him as someone who broke all of the important news for the Gunners for many years. So he's connected over there. But it seems that Inter Miami are quote unquote increasingly confident that they're in a position to sign the Argentine legend when his contract at PSG runs out this upcoming summer. A lot going on for Messi. I think everyone is talking about this World Cup being potentially his last and what that could mean, and maybe it coinciding with the decision to leave for North America, David. But we've seen these links before. This seems a little more credible than usual than we've seen in the past.
Yeah, for starters, we didn't know he'd ever leave Barcelona, right? So now that's already happened. You've already broken that seal. Now the possibility exists. PSG doesn't seem to be his dream spot. If he's going to leave PSG, there's very few places he can go. And I think everyone's aware of the timeline. His age, 2026 World Cup. If it's going to happen, it's got to happen soon. And so I think that's where a lot of you're hearing reports, and then everyone's sort of thinking about it logically, and it all makes sense. I still can't really gauge what it'll mean. Gareth Bale didn't work out. Fine. That's Gareth Bale. That's different. Beckham, I think, was a success, but it took a little time. But again, different. Different athlete, different style of player, different timeline. I don't know, man. If Messi goes if he wins the World Cup, I think that's a different calculation of then he'll have accomplished everything and it's on to the last thing for him. If he doesn't, it's not like he's trying to get to 2026, so that doesn't affect it. But I do wonder if he kind of has a little bit more of a juice to go back to Barcelona and try and help. But, Devang, it's going to be a big deal.
Oh, man. And Inter Miami definitely has a hole to fill there. I mean, a team that is seemingly on a better path than they have been, and now filling the void of Gonzalo Higuain, perhaps another Argentine is going to fill it. Stay tuned. Elsewhere, another bombshell report that made a lot of news this week. MLS considering a massive playoff expansion and a new format as soon as next year. This potential deal would create 30 postseason games for teams to battle it out. This also coincides with that Apple TV deal starting next year, David, 10 years, $2.5 billion. The new format consists of the first 8 teams in both conferences being in 4 groups. The knockout stage, as per usual, separated by East and West teams, so that kind of remains the same. But these are a ton more games, and it makes sense that this is coinciding with the Apple deal, David. But at first glance, I was a bit concerned because I feel like they're making games for the sake of making them. And we've talked a lot on this show about how many games players are asked to play and whether or not that's sustainable. This doesn't feel helpful in that regard, but I understand the economics behind it.
Yeah, it's just MLS is not the most popular league in America. It's not the most popular league in the world or Canada, wherever. And this sort of feels again like this, maybe this one will work. And it's like continuity is the only thing that's going to grow it being around. So changing the format over and over again every 3 years, it's not going to be like, oh yeah, you know what? All of these Dallas Cowboys fans who have never watched an MLS game, they've been waiting for the group stage playoffs so that then they'll tune in and get excited. Like, that's not going to happen. And I think the frustrating thing to me is, okay, the Leagues Cup, that's unique. Like, Leagues Cup as an entity is unique. Doing it in a group stage format with pro teams, that's also unique. So you're going to take the one thing you did unique and just double up on it. It just, all of that lacks originality and all of those ideas. But as you said, you can understand it. And I do think in a vacuum, the format's probably right in that it will award the regular season well, because higher seeded teams will have less, more chance to slip up, but still be competitive. I don't think there'll be a ton of dead rubber games. So like, all of that you can convince me of and can make sense, but it's just, okay, well, when after that do you change it again? And I think I've been on the record in saying if you gave me the magic wand or whatever, I'd go apertura clausura, especially with the Leagues Cup now, and I would do one before and one after.
They should make you in charge, by the way. David, I'm not just saying that because we're on the same podcast together, but a man with good ideas, put him in charge. No, I agree. The other thing I would say is I'm not against change. I kind of like the idea of tweaking something that isn't working and not sticking with it just because you have to, because that's expected. That being said, I think this is a little much, so I'm a bit worried about it. But to get into this Apple deal, David, there are some positive aspects. Regional blackouts ending Saturday night, the match night broadcast offered in English, Spanish, and French. We were talking about that on the Discord in terms of I wonder who's going to get those gigs, especially in Canada, because the blackout rule, to me, David, was something that's still plaguing sports across the board and maybe my most hated. But the fact that this is now over and the fact that it seems promising who they want to line up to call these games, just looks good.
Yeah, I think it can't be worse than what exists right now. And I think there's a lot there's a lot of space for improvement, and I think this is going to bring a lot of that.
I thought I was being diplomatic, and then you had to come in here and blow it up.
Yeah, but I think I'm being positive by being that way.
You are.
So yeah,
you are.
It's going to be interesting. It's obviously still a lot of moving pieces, but it's definitely going to be interesting. And I think for people like us who are already MLS fans and want the easiest way and the best way to consume it, I think that this will provide that.
Agreed. Finally, MLS awards. I mentioned Gonzalo Higuain, comeback player of the year, Almada, newcomer of the year, Glesnes, defender of the year, probably my favorite defender of the last 5 years. So happy to see that in terms of a reward. And Hani Mukhtar gets the golden boot and I believe was named MVP just today. Any qualms with these trophy shouts?
Not really. A comeback player of the year, I think, is the weirdest award. And like,
they got to rename this. They have to call this the Vibes Trophy of the Year.
Right.
We felt good watching you play, so this is an award for you.
I voted for Kai Wagner because he was part of the same defense as Glesnes, but set the record for assists as a defender and literally was third in Major League Soccer in overall assists, not even playing in a back five, playing in a back four. But he's not technically as good a defender as Glesnes, so I can understand that. And I think Hani Mukhtar, to me, the amount he mattered to his team, the numbers he put up, it felt pretty clear that he was MVP. Coach of the Year was one. I said I voted for Wilfried Nancy on the coach side. Honestly, the way LAFC bounced back, if they win MLS Cup and play the same soccer again, it probably should be Steve Cherundolo, but I don't think any of those, I've said it a few times, I don't think any of the options were wrong.
Agreed. And I think that's where I ended out as well. I think I'm trying to spend less time fuming over award selections because as I've grown older, I've realized that there's a lot factoring into this. And it's fine. We talk about this very same thing with Sean and the CPL Under 21 Player of the Year award, but there's a lot of different reasons for people getting awards and not all of it is merit-based. But I think for all of these, I have no real qualms with them. Finally, it's that time of year. Sportico releasing their team value rankings across multiple leagues, including MLS. Perhaps no big shocks here, David. I did find it interesting, some of the analysis on this and people remarking that if you're an owner of an MLS team, you're getting some pretty good bang for your buck in terms of investment and operating costs and what you're seeing revenue-wise is among the better values in the league. But LAFC is number one, $900 million, LA Galaxy 2, 865. Atlanta United 3, 855 million. TFC is the highest ranking Canadian team at 705 million. And the other two Canadian teams way down there, 26th Whitecaps, 415. And CF Montreal, dead last, 390 million. Nothing too shocking here. It's a bit fascinating though, David, to see maybe the percentage changes and a team like DC United climbing the way they do based on, I guess, Audi Field and having that facility and maybe that signaling to other franchises or clubs like, hey, you don't have to be a Chicago Fire forever and languish down in 17th and see no positive movement here. You do have to do something though on the back end, and that includes maybe building a stadium. Yeah,
I think for things like this, one, I'd like to say I'm pretty sure things like this are bullshit. So I take it all with a grain of salt. It's some fake calculation. If someone doesn't pay the money, it doesn't really matter. And if someone wants to buy one of these teams, these may not be the numbers they pay for it. So I would point that out to everyone first. But the things that you can't change or can't go away are real estate, market size, and market share. And so those are things where, the two LA teams, they've got they both own their buildings. They've got the ability to tap into massive economics and connect with a ton of different people. And so they're big. And then when you look at the three Canadian teams, you're talking about I would assume one of the biggest factors is the transfer conversion rate between Canadian dollars and American dollars. I think if it was all the same, TFC would probably be top 3 on this list if they weren't operating in CAD, which unfortunate for you guys. So that would be my guess on most of this. But, Vancouver doesn't own a soccer stadium, smaller market. And the issue I think for Vancouver and Montreal is the buildings are so old. There's not really a ton, especially for Montreal. Like, where's the growth with that? And so that sort of sets them behind pretty poorly.
Yeah. And I think the are these numbers real conversation has to be the first thing probably when discussing these lists, because Forbes has them as well. And I know they're much talked about, and it's a big talking point when bad teams are valued too high, I feel like. But in this case, I think the disparity between the Canadian markets, it's a bit interesting, though the numbers might not be real. I get it, David. And I think not cause for alarm, but if you're talking about re-energizing the situation or building off the success we've already seen on the field when it comes to CF Montreal, how do you capitalize on that? Like, how do you grow this brand, this team? We've seen some missteps with the branding over there, but I wonder as well if Stade Saputo is something that they've outgrown.
Yeah, I love Stade Saputo because, as I've said, it has that natural growth feel, but it does feel like it's at its peak, and I don't know how you grow it, especially outside of Quebec. How do you grow if you're French heavy and there isn't really a French community around that? Besides, now you're starting to go overseas. Are you really going to appeal to people in Africa and the Caribbean and in Europe? So I don't know. Building out the academy and building out that is probably your best path forward. And the Mihailovic stuff I think has worked, but it's a great soccer market, right? You need the next Ismail Kones. You need to sell Kone for the right number and push that. And I think that's the simplest path forward for Montreal. And the other one is just, if the league makes money, you make a portion of that. And if you can just be a successful part of that league and help the value continue to rise, then your value will rise. Will it rise more than the teams around you? No, but that's not the whole ball game. Right. So I think that's sort of what you need to think about.
It's a great point. Finally, I think I've tried to sign off in this segment 8 times, but I mean it for real this time. Some signings and non-signings, but Sam Piette sticking around to Montreal, a pretty big deal, DG. I think the contract itself as well, and with the potential turnover that we've discussed at length, locking in someone like Sam Piette, who's heading to Qatar, on many fronts, a positive thing for them. And Joseph Martinez not returning to Atlanta, perhaps not surprising. 2 contrasting moves, but the Eastern Conference, man, never a dull moment.
No, MLS is wild. Like, you have to tell players at MLS Cup that they won't be coming back next year. And just like the flow of information, it's such a wild experience. And this is one of them of like, man, everything sucked for Montreal. And then it's like, oh, Sam Piet's coming back. But as you said, I think this is a move that just makes sense for where the club sits right now and what he represents for them.
When we come back after the break, we welcome in Sean Kay to talk everything CPL final, Forge lifting the trophy once again, plus the NWSL final, Christine Sinclair doing her damn thing, and some other news and notes coming up next. Welcome back to a football podcast. Very pleased to be joined by the Canadian vanguard of the show. I know I'm also Canadian, but Sean is the Canadian soccer expert, and we're very pleased to welcome him back as we've talked about MLS, but now it's time to delve into the CPL and a new champion crowned, a familiar one, Forge doing it again. We'll break the match down and then discuss the end of year awards and see if we picked the right people for these honors.
Forges does go out of the header on and in! Forge straight first, and it's Alessandro Hojabrapur, a header in the final, this time for Hamilton. This is Matusala advancing, has an opening outside as a touch, another touch, brilliant, a goal, the go-ahead, dropping the hammer in the Canadian Premier League final. Who else but David Schweiger?
There you have it. Forge FC cementing themselves as the class of the CPL. A 2-0 win over Atlético Ottawa in Ottawa, their third CPL title. Forge have played in all 4 CPL finals in league history, which is still a bit messed up to consider, but pretty damn impressive. 2019, 2020, 2022. I guess we begin from the very top, gentlemen, and ask, what's made Forge this special? Because I think we've seen, ebbs and flows from the other teams, and of course Pacific doing what they did last year and Cavalry always being in the conversation. But time and time again, there's been one team that's pushing the envelope, getting players in that are just extremely exciting to watch, and it's been Forge. I ask Sean, why?
I think it's a combination of obviously a resume in Bobby Simeoniotis. Like, he's come in and he built unquestionably the greatest academy in Canadian soccer history, and having all these resumes in front of him. And then on top of that, having an ownership group of who basically spearheaded the league. So you've got this sort of perfect group of owner and management come together to sort of create this dynasty. They've got themselves a strong fan base who's dedicated. They've got themselves a stadium that is already paid for, and they've got connections with partners. It's everything you needed to build a winner, and then Bobby filled it in with player after player. Even when you didn't have player one, you didn't have Kyle Becker for this entire game. You had other guys who you knew could step up. You had a Borges, you had a Chouanière, you had the whole group there. So as long as Bobby is there, I think this team is going to continually be the team to beat, and it's going to be really, really hard to knock them off their throne.
Well, that's the question, David, because I think there's now a sentiment that Bobby perhaps will be leaving for potentially a job in MLS or elsewhere. And I wonder, similar to the Wilf Nancy discussion about Montreal last week, when you take him out of this club, what does that mean going forward?
I think either way, I want to start by saying I think this is their most impressive championship, because all the things Sean said, that was the advantage from the start, right? Year one, It was Sigma guys coming in when clubs didn't have identities yet. It was spending from the top down for Forge. It was the resources. This is now a new team. So I think that to me stands out in terms of winning this. And it's not just Kyle Becker being suspended, right? It's, Kwame Awuah is not a part of this anymore. So many of the pieces that were key to the team at the start are no longer a part of this, but you bring in a Wubens Pachias, a Terran Campbell, Hojabrapur, like all these next generation guys, plus Chouanière. And so to do it again, I think that would give me hope as a Forge fan to say, okay, this club's built more than one winner, and therefore there's a blueprint at least to rebuild post this team, whether it's with or without Bobby Smirniotis. Now, it's clearly going to be harder without him because he has, as an individual, been so key to what they've done. And he has those connections. Right at the beginning of the year, Jordan Hamilton comes in and Ashton Morgan. Those are personal connections he has that he can lean on. I think there's still a blueprint that says Forge is a winner in this league. And if you want, one, to win, but two, maybe to restart your career, whatever it is, I think Forge stands alone at the top of this, saying this is where you go to do that. And I think in showing that they could do it with a second generation of players on the road without Kyle Becker shows that Forge can win in more than one way.
We've talked about the title winners, and I just also would like to say David Chouanier for Qatar. Is that crazy? It probably is, but he is an ultimate big game player, and I feel like he could be useful, but maybe that's a bridge too far for now. Just stepping back and looking at both teams and looking at Atlético Ottawa, I mean, losing at home in a final is always disappointing, and you could tell the vibes were quite sad towards the end of that match. That being said, comparing where they are now to where they were last year, Sean, it's an incredible leap for them. And everything we said about them last week in terms of forging this identity and building on something that I think we all agree is really promising out in Ottawa, this was a successful season.
Absolutely. You've got yourself a team to build on and grow. They're very young. You've got a couple key guys who are a bit older, but they're still a young team who are just learning. Ollie Bassett's only getting better. And I think, once again, I think they felt a little, at least from watching, a little shook for the first 45 minutes. I think playing in front of 15,000 fans in a final and never really having that experience, I think Forge's experience shone through in that, and Ottawa just couldn't really get up to speed quick enough, and we're already digging down before it was too late. But once again, you're worst to first. You've got 15,000 people in the stands to watch your team play. And that's only with, I think, a limit of 200 to 300 tickets that were allocated to Forge. So like that is a fan base that you can go after year after year. And as long as you're building it the right way, you're laughing. This is what you dream of when you're thinking about building a franchise. And Ottawa fans got to be excited about the future.
And I would say, and I could be wrong here, but we've already seen the rumors around Marco Bustos and TFC trials. Yeah. We've heard some other names as well. I think this is an Athletic Ottawa team that has one more year staying together. I don't think Ollie Bassett's getting MLS looks this year. I don't think Ingham is as well. So you'd assume they will go into next year as a favorite. And if we're talking about it, and Bobby Smirniotis is potentially coaching Montreal, right? And Bustos is leaving Pacific, and what's the future for Cavalry having run up into the same issues year and year again? It feels like Ottawa's in a good place to start next year as a favorite, and having the home form they have and having the style they have. I'd be shocked if we don't at least see them in the playoffs again.
I would agree. Just to wrap up this season, I think, again, another banner year for the league and building off of or getting out of the pandemic situation to be where they are. I think it's been extremely positive. That being said, there are some other stories going on outside of that CPL final, and we turn to Edmonton and the fact that it's seeming increasingly murky in terms of what their status will be in competing in the CPL next year, which sounds dramatic, but I think this is where we're at. I listened to Alan Koch talking his Global News about the season he's had and the way it's kind of gone. And obviously things not just going poorly on the pitch, winning 4 of 28 games, but also off the pitch, guys. It doesn't look very good at all.
No, it does not. I believe Dwayne Rollins was tweeting this week, or actually it might've been the day of the final, that there's basically a potential new franchises being blocked by the current owners if there was the option of doing that, and then that the owner isn't looking or is in so much debt that they're looking to just sort of call shop. So it's a sad state in Edmonton because they were so excited 3-4 years ago, but it doesn't seem like, basically there needs to be a hero from Edmonton who's lived in Edmonton, who has tons of money, who may live in Germany, that
who
needs
could
to
that
save
be?
this. Because aside from him, I am very worried about this Edmonton franchise.
Sorry, for the people who don't know a ton about Edmonton, can we get a name connected to this?
Alphonso Davies.
Oh, you think he's going to buy the team?
I don't think he's going to buy the team, but I believe that he has the name, the friends, the backers to be the hero that Edmonton needs. I think there's not many names in Edmonton that have that kind of money that want to invest in soccer.
But aren't we coming off the back of a championship game being hosted in Ottawa by a team owned by Atlético Madrid, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be in Edmonton.
No, but not to be, no disrespect to our Edmonton fans. I don't think the market is as attractive as Ottawa was. Ottawa once was a champion. They had past history of success. Edmonton really hasn't shown success as a soccer franchise for a long time. And that's outside of like 2,000 seat. Like, I just don't see it as, there's no real stadium unless you're going to play in Commonwealth in front of like 80,000 seat stadium. The infrastructure in Edmonton and then the travel issues and everything surrounding it just doesn't seem like a sexy franchise to be buying in on.
Interesting. My only recollection here was they were a competitive NASL team that it seemed like had good talent for a number of years, and there was some buzz around them.
Yep.
But you're right in terms of facility, nowhere close to what Ottawa has. And I mean, just from an American, I know more about Ottawa than I do about Edmonton. But I do think one of the attractive parts of CPL is the low buy-in. And like that's the core of the Atlético Ottawa connection, is that if you're trying to build a global network, you need teams to place players. You need outposts to recruit in and scout from. And CPL is a cheaper way to do it than USL. And I don't even understand if you could do it in MLS Next Pro, you probably could, and MLS. So like that's the bid, that's the draw. And you'd assume off the back of what happened with Ottawa this year, like the opening is there to go out and try and find the next ones.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think that there is a case. I just think when you look at the highlights of the last 2 years, I don't know if you can build a package that includes those past 2 years of like a no fan base. Like they were averaging 800-900 fans a game at Clark Stadium.
Mm-hmm.
And then the fact that I believe the current owner is sort of not blocking, but wanting to get full value of what he has invested for it to be a franchise. So then you're not paying franchise fees. You're paying above franchise fees to recoup. So it's a tough situation for Edmonton. I don't know how it comes about. My guess is there's going to be more mediation from the league standpoint, and obviously having a new commissioner in play is going to help those conversations. But with nothing happening in this past calendar year, and knowing how quickly it's coming up for next year, it's going to be really tough, especially because most of those players were on loan from other teams in the league or outside the league.
Devang, I just want to say, pulling the curtain back for everyone, we're actually recording this on Tuesday afternoon, and full credit to Sean Kay that currently Tottenham are out of the Champions League, and he didn't even react audibly on this show.
Be quiet. You are killing me right now.
I believe strongly in jinxes, so I'm not going to say anything as we record this episode. Moving on, finally, Valor FC midfielder Sean Rea named the top under 21 player in CPL. I was thinking about Atlético Ottawa's rise and what it could maybe mean for the rest of the league and some of the teams that have really found it hard to make an imprint in this league so far, like your Edmontons, but also like your Valors. And I think this season, though they didn't make the playoffs, some definite building blocks there as well. So that's positive for them. Shall we get to the NWSL final?
Not yet. Not yet. I have a beef. And David, it might be the same thing, but I cannot believe, don't get me wrong, full credit to Sean Rea and his season, and that he is going to move on to big things. But they had a Di Rosario with the opportunity to win a trophy, and in maybe the only time that he's going to be in your league, and you withheld him. He was your leading goal scorer in the league. He led a team that didn't score goals, and you just chose somebody. It's shocking to me. Don't get me wrong. no discredit to Rhea. Like he played a great year, but I think it's a head scratcher from a marketing standpoint. And then even justifiable. This guy bagged goals. Like I don't know. Anyone else feel that, or am I just passionate? And
I am curious here, Sean, that you believe that the marketing quality of an award is the way that you should base it.
Partially, 100%. You're a new league. You go 100% with who's going to be the guy that you're going to market. Full stop. I'm not saying it's the full thing, but it's a part of it. It's got to be.
Okay.
You've got to have you are in league. You're in year 4, year 5. If like, what's going to make a bigger imprint?
It's a bad look, isn't it? That's a bad precedent, though. I think
you're talking about a guy who scored 12 goals. You're talking about a guy who scored 12 goals in this season for a rookie. Aside from a guy that went and got sold, like, it's not a hard sell. It's not. I'm not even saying it's the only decision. I'm just saying that this is a guy that was brought back into this league, who has a good story, has an incredible name, and he scored 12 goals this year and is CPL, not a lone player from FC Montreal.
Right.
Like, this is your guy. You can put a pin on him and say, this is your guy. This is our under 20. Like, I'm not saying that the precious under 22 under 22 is not, but there's got to be marketing decisions in there. There's got to be a reason why a Jaquil Marshall-Rutty, who didn't play this year, gets on the list anyway, so that down the line you can pin being like, he was a member and he got sold for $15 million, or you put it on his resume. All I'm saying is that De Rosario should have won it on the first place, and then also the story you could tell makes me feel even more passionate about why he should have been the under 21 player of the year. Sorry for
I get what you're saying. No, and also it could have been Wubin's Pastias as well, right?
Yep.
He scored 12 goals this year, and another young player. I wonder if in that vein there was a thought process of like, let's promote the quality of loaning players to this league.
Yeah, fair enough.
Right? Which, again, is not a reason you should give an award.
No.
But you are right in saying D-Row deserves it, and so therefore the debate is fair.
Fair enough.
we only got Sean for 20-ish minutes, but we got a heated up, passionate Sean, which you always love to see. That's wonderful. And you kind of swayed me, but you used the word marketing too many times.
I'm
and
sorry. I spent too many times.
My eyebrows went up. My eyebrows went up.
Oh, God.
Moving on to the NWSL, Canadian captain Christine Sinclair captained Portland to her third championship, all with the Thorns. She also set a league record for minutes played in the playoffs in the process. She left that game in the 73rd minute. The Thorns, 2-0 winners. Sophia Smith, the MVP, doing MVP type things. Interesting stuff because the Portland Thorns have been in the news for all of the wrong reasons, along with the Timbers, which we've documented on this show, David. But how did this measure? Because it's kind of hard to separate all these things, but I think to celebrate the players on the field, that's the least we can do.
100%. And I was at the final. It was a lot of fun. I went with my in-laws who live down in the DC area, and it was, a cool event. Now, I will say, as someone who's been around a lot of these events, I think you could feel in some moments the lack of infrastructure for NWSL of like blowing out a big moment, and just like the pregame in the stadium, there wasn't a ton going on. There wasn't even really music playing, which was a bizarre thing that happened. And it's just, again, the resources aren't exactly there, but I thought it was a good event. I thought clearly the better team won. There's no question about that, both across the regular season and in this game. And it was cool. It's cool to see Christine Sinclair change who she is, right? The true center forward, the all-time leading goal scorer in world history, playing as a 10. Underneath the MVP, a 22-year-old who's going to stretch the line and attack people. You've got two wingers outside of her who are both 1v1 demons. And Sinclair has completely fit like a glove in that spot. And so it's elongated her career. It's led her to another championship, which was awesome to see her lift that trophy. Like all of those things, there's not a given. Look at what we're looking on the men's side at Ronaldo and potentially Messi and how they're aging and how you sort of deal with it. And I think Sinclair is a model of that. And she's done it both for the national team and club team. And I don't think there's anyone suffering more from what's going on with Portland top down than the players, right? These players have to answer the questions day in and day out. They have to question their, physical safety in that environment over and over again. So I definitely wasn't rooting for them because you don't want anything good to happen to Merritt Paulson right now, and you have no idea how this will end. But you have to feel good for these players, and they earned it. And I think it's someone with the national team sort of said of like, unfortunately, we've become used to dealing with stuff and still competing at a high level. But you have to tip your cap to these women and what they were able to accomplish this year.
Great story. Christine Sinclair, Janine Becky, Rianne Wilkinson, of course, the coach, Karina LeBlanc, the GM. A lot of Canadian content.
Shout out also to Desiree Scott, captain for KC, and she was awesome in this playoff run. And I kind of questioned whether she was still a starter for Canada at her age, and I think she's proven that she can be.
A lot of national team players well represented in this final, not just from the Canadian side. The U.S. women's national team as well represented. Yeah, I think you said it perfectly, David. And once again, any chance we get to celebrate Christine Sinclair and what she's meant to this country and in terms of soccer overall in North America, I think that's one of the cooler aspects. I know she's obviously a big deal up here, but she's a big deal down south too. I find that extremely heartwarming.
Are you ready for my rant now?
Yes.
All yours.
Go for it.
All yours.
There are very few things Major League Soccer has gotten right. The one is moving from neutral site to home venue.
Yes.
And it costs more money. It's harder to organize, but you can do less. When you have a home market that cares, that it's a title for that city and that already has a built-in supporters group and fan base, you don't have to do much because the game already matters. Look at Ottawa, right? Like, you didn't have to do the full, who's the concert, what's the pregame outdoor look like? Like, let the fans do it. And you have a situation where the mayor and the governor and the local celebrities and the local sports teams, they're going to be posting and coming and connecting. And that does 80% of what NWSL had to pay for and push in DC. And I think Audi Field was a good idea. And obviously the Spirit winning last year, it's not the worst idea in the world. Is like, okay, who can we expect to win if we're picking a neutral site early? Well, who's been good? But it has to be a host market for the next finals because it should feel like that championship event in the building.
I think we all agree with that.
Oh, yeah.
It's a bit ridiculous to not have that. In 2022, what are we doing?
Yeah, it's like, I can understand the Super Bowl. I can understand it. It's bigger than the sporting event, silly enough. But actually, can I use the term marketing a little bit more? But once again, what you want is just the fans. You want the fans' passion. And if you're putting it in a neutral site, nobody cares. They're all just wearing NWSL hats or NFL hats at the big event, and nobody really cares.
I 100% agree. Like, as much as I love the Rob Lowe NFL hat, it's not the point of this whole thing. Like, you're supposed to reward a certain segment of fans who have been there the whole season and deserve to see their team triumph. I do feel like it's a thing where they're kind of copying Europe a bit as well, with the Champions League vibe or the Europa League, and we don't need to do that. So, well said, David. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you. I'm sorry I couldn't make the whole thing, but I'm glad I came on and got to spit some fire for 20 minutes.
Yeah, biggest Forge fan here. Otherwise, we're getting
Right?
Devang's York United Ottawa takes. So we had to bring you on.
Trying to represent segments of Ontario that are just frankly not covered enough. No, great to have you, Sean. Congrats to Forge once again. Congrats to the Portland Thorns and Christine Sinclair. When we come back to wrap up this show, it's the mailbag Ask AFP. Welcome back to AFP. It's that time again for the mailbag. But first, a big shout out for the newest autosave series. It's the podcast on the Soda Network alongside ours, hosted by one of our dear friends, David.
You know him very well. This is our favorite segment, Ask AFP. Nick Andrade, the originator of that line. We loved having him on this show. He is as good and as deep on video games as anyone else out there. So I would highly recommend listening to him, and it's cool that he's getting to do his thing that he's passionate about.
It's wicked. It's Nick and Camille on their latest adventure as they play the all-new Gotham Knights game. So listen to Autosave Gotham Knights on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. David is right. Camille's amazing as well. It's a great show. As someone like myself who I think plays a lot less video games these days, I do still love to hear about them because I'm a massive fan, and Autosave does a great job of bringing you into their world and really getting deep and immersed in it. So I highly recommend checking out that show, Gotham Knights, Nick, Camille, Autosave. All right, let's get to the mailbag. Got some great questions this week. Ask McGinnis. Ask McGinnis in the Posting Hall of Fame in terms of the questions he gets us every week. But here's the first one, DG. He asks, Elon Musk recently wasted $44 billion buying Twitter. If he gave you a mere $1 billion to invest in something soccer related, no strings attached, what would you put the money towards?
$1 billion's a little bit larger than what people normally say in these things, right? If you won the lotto, like it's never $1 billion.
Yeah.
And I do think $1 billion is a number I don't properly comprehend of like how much I'd have to use.
Right. Let's say after tax. He gave you this after tax, so you have $1 billion.
Okay, well, I'd like to say, first of all, if I have to pay that much in taxes, I don't even want the money. That's a popular trope that the certain
This is
type
how
of
you
people
go
like
MAGA.
to say.
This is how you go MAGA.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a slippery slope, David. But these are MAGA talking points.
No one even wants to be a millionaire anymore because of the taxes. But here's my answer. In short, I think I would start like a Right to Dream type academy in the Caribbean, and I would create a space to bring great young players into them, develop them, sell them, but also you have the educational component, the lifestyle component as well. And to me, that would build CONCACAF up because you pull players from all across the Caribbean and maybe Central America. So you get to help young people. You get to create something that people in the region can be proud of. And I think that's probably the way you go about growing the region at best, not building the US and Mexico up. So all in all, that's probably my answer, but I, again, can't really comprehend that amount of money.
Well, you made me feel a lot worse because that's a really lovely answer, and that would facilitate a lot of positive change. I think I'd just buy Arsenal, to be honest. I don't know if that would be enough, though. I think
I don't know if that would be enough.
I don't think it would be. I'd have to go in on it with someone else, which could cause some awful power sharing dynamics, but
I also think if you buy a team for all that money, then you don't have anything to spend.
to buy, it's a terrible idea, and I would be bankrupt within seconds. But I just want that new owner bounce and be unveiled at the Emirates with my scarf and waving to the adoring masses.
You could buy a piece so you're a part owner, and then you get to be a part owner.
Right. No, I might have to reassess. But yeah, I think $1 billion is such a massive number. I'm just looking at these MLS team values, and perhaps that's a better starting point. Creating my own club, investing all of the money into making it a superpower. S. McGinnis also brought up the heated bagel debate from last week, still making waves across the world, frankly, in terms of some of the feedback we've been getting. Apparently, there is a Montreal famous cream cheese brand, Liberté, that is no more. You can't get it there, which is a big deal. But I think his biggest gripe, S. McGinnis, David, I don't know how you were led to believe this, that they don't put cream cheese on the bagel and that necessarily makes it not a bagel. Was that something you were saying? Because I think that is false.
None of the bagel places I went, and I went to two. I went to Saint Viateur or whatever, and I went to, what was the other one called? A few blocks away, another one. They gave you cream cheese with it, but they did not put the cream cheese on for you.
But why? Is it because maybe people feel like they're getting too much and they want to control?
No, it just seemed like that's the way things are done.
Wow.
Am I wrong?
That's when he just asked for a correction. He asked for a correction. So I think you are wrong. Or this is more anecdotal evidence that's not factual, and you're using it to build your web of lies. I think that's what he's getting at.
Fairmount Bagel was the other one I went to. Those two places did not put cream cheese on. They gave you cream cheese to like dip it in, which I thought was weird. Now I saw at restaurants, they did like lox sandwiches as like brunch options.
Right. But
But also the bagel, it's too small. It's thin. So how much, you can't really cover that much with cream cheese. You guys, this is a ridiculous conversation. I'm not offending. New York bagels are just so much better. That's a different topic.
We went to bat a lot on the show for Montreal, much to the chagrin of our Toronto listeners, supporting CF Montreal on their run. But I think people are now believing that we are basically a Montreal podcast, and our defense of their bagels has caused some heated conversations. But I don't know. I have to go there now, I guess, to remind myself what it's like and see for myself what the facts are.
Go there, and then I will ship you New York bagels, and the bagels you get shipped will still be as good.
Also in the Discord, Jason G shouting out Marco Bustos, who is going on trial with TFC. Very exciting, David. Someone that has obviously been a massive performer for Pacific FC. TFC has not been shy about bringing in players from the CPL. A couple of Pacific guys, actually, Caden Chunk, Lucas McNaughton, following in those footsteps. It's not like they are low to that position, David. So I feel like there's a real potential here for him to crack this team.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And I think your response in the Discord, which is just more high-level players, is better. I think that's right. And I would also say, like, you have to have some experienced talent on your MLS Next Pro teams for young guys to grow and build. And I don't think you're signing him to say he can only play on your MLS Next Pro team. But it's not a bad thing to just have more talent in your club and figure it out later.
I back it. Good luck to Marco. I mean, wouldn't be surprised if he's a member of this roster going forward. Finally, another discussion on the Discord, this time Mel S mentioning that she would have liked someone other than Forge to win. Is Forge's dominance, 3 of the first 4 titles, bad for the league? I think it's a fascinating conversation, David, and I would argue it's not, because if I look at other leagues or more established leagues, having those focal points, those teams everyone wants to beat, those teams everyone are jealous of, envious of, it drives the conversation, and then it makes others up their game to match what has been just the class of the league. So I think this is not necessarily a bad thing at all.
I think I agree. I think giants are important for sports because you need someone for everyone else to root against, right? Because you're not going to have a rooting interest in every game, and having the Dallas Cowboys and the New York Yankees is important because it drives other people to watch. So I think I agree with you, but it would have been nice for Ottawa at home in front of their fans to have won.
Also fair. Very fair. Still very sad for my Ottawa friends, but once again, a great season. And that's it for today. Hope you enjoyed this week's episode. If you could be so kind, a rating or a review or both, wherever you get your podcasts would be incredible for us as we try to get this pod into more people's ears. We're on Twitter @afootballpod, and of course on patreon.com/afootballpodcast. Get the show ad free on Tuesdays. Get access to the Discord where we're talking footy all the time. It's a great place, so I highly recommend it. For producer Greg on the ones and twos, and for Zach and Sean and David, thank you so much for listening to AFP. We'll talk to you next week.